to start or scale your property development business to 8 figures and beyond, then you're in the right place. This is the Property XPerts Podcast with Ben Richards and Jack Jiggens, two serial entrepreneurs bringing weekly insights from our award-winning businesses. In these podcasts, you'll learn how we found, funded and delivered over £80 million worth of property in the last 6 years, with templates you can use, deal analysis and deep dive discussions that will help you build your businesses successfully. We hope you'll enjoy.
Hello everyone, happy Friday afternoon. First off, apologies for running slightly late today. I've been at a family office conference in London and unfortunately the traffic was horrific in London and then also in Henley-on-Thames where I live because of the Royal Regatta. So sincere apologies if everyone's been waiting for the Q&A and we are here now, and believe it or not, I've had zero prep. So you are listening to me answer these questions off the hip. Which might be good to get raw answers to your questions. Thank you everyone that put questions in. If you haven't joined us before, as mentioned in the little trailer, Ben and I run multiple 6, 7 and 8 figure property and construction businesses in the UK. And today is a special where I'm going live into just a Q&A. So do ask questions live because I will answer questions live. And of course, we've got some preloaded questions as well. So without further ado, we'll start cracking on. I'm doing all the technical stuff in the background as well, so you'll have to bear with. So mine and Ben's goal in our development company is to deliver 1,000 homes and £1 billion worth of property in the UK. And we do that by working with trusted and partied investors. We've got a few live investments at the moment. So if you would like to sort of chat a bit further about how we could potentially work together, we'd massively welcome the conversation. There's obviously no expectations of the conversation. It could just be a very informal chat initially, and we would welcome you reaching out to us. So if you're listening along, it's the 4th of July, which is a big day in our household, being married to an American. And today is just a live Q&A. So for podcast listeners, I'll try and read out the questions as best I can. But if you're watching live, questions will be on the screen. So this one actually came in 2 weeks ago. Sorry, Ed, that I didn't get round to it last week. But we're going to kick straight off. If you've got any questions, please put them whatever platform you're in. I should be able to see the questions and I'll get round to answering as many as I can. So to kick us off, so you've got a reputation as a really good creative deal maker. Thank you very much, Ed. When I go to speak to vendors, I say, if you want a fast, unconditional cash offer, then this is the best we can do. But I'd love to speak to you about how we can improve our cash offer by adjusting some terms and conditions. And to do that, I need to know how I can help you. What's your pain point? I would like to try and work with you to find a win-win solution. So very clear, we actually do dual offers like this, Ed. So very, very common practice for us. He then goes on to say, they tend to look at me with cold eyes. Do you mind sharing your thoughts on the subject or even some sort of innate script to get them to see where we're trying to basically create a deal? So my role in all of the businesses is deal making, so acquisitions and getting the deal pulled together. I love creating the deals. I feel that it's very much an art and a science put together. We essentially have always had in all of our businesses a dual offer process. And a dual offer, for everyone listening, is where you typically have an unconditional, faster transaction that's of a lower value, or a prolonged duration that might be subject to planning, it might be subject to a condition, it might be subject to striking a lease. It can be subject to anything really. And the beauty of a dual offer is typically sellers are either money motivated or time motivated. So to put that into context, an auction is a perfect example. So in auctions, people just want something gone and as a result tend to take less of a value for that particular property. If you see a house on the market that's been on the market for a year or longer, they're typically money motivated people and have the patience and the time to get the right value. Now, Ed, one thing I would say, and first and foremost, is the more you know about a seller, the better. And that is in every situation. So in sales, you're always trying to find out as much information as you can. You've alluded to this by opening broad and open questions. But one thing that is a commonly misconception sometimes is we're in this day to day and we're doing deals day in, day out. And I actually say to a chap in my acquisitions team, I love the creativity, but sometimes you're being over complex to the person and the audience that you're communicating with. So that's one really key thing there. You're trying to get as much information out of them as possible, but you don't want to overcomplicate things, because sometimes complexity or not understanding the questions you're asking, like what's your pain point, you might want to word that slightly differently and more openly. So I like to ask questions such as, what is important for you? You know, how quickly would you like this done? Is there a reason that you would like it done this quickly? So to open basically every conversation and Q&A that you do, you typically ask really, really open questions and try and delve into the topics after you've gone, broadly over speaking. So if you understand the motivations, and that's a really, really important word to take on board, that's really important. So the way that we do it and communicate that is we basically fact find and just talk and talk and talk. And you've got to try and allow them to also feel like they're controlling the conversation and go down the rabbit holes and the tangents that they think is important, and to understand. And also one really important thing, I'm quite commercial and black and white. But when you're dealing with a vendor, you have to go into the grey areas and also ensure that they can see you are acknowledging the strong points for them. So the way that we typically do it is fairly, fairly straightforward. We typically say, this is the sort of price that we could pay if you just want to get the deal done, and we take on the risk of the planning or trying to buy the neighbor's plot as well, or whatever it may be, and identify that and say that there is a risk attached to for us the unconditional bid, and that is why it is at that level. I actually typically also say you might get more. Hang on a second, just got a technical issue. I actually sometimes say that you may actually get more for your property if you went to the open market or went to someone else or went to a family or whatever it may be. But we're purely based on commercial and making a commercial decision, and that is the best value that we can get to. So try and, for us, remove a bit of the emotion, because what you don't want them to think is you're just a greedy bid in the ribs kind of guy. You're actually, there's numbers behind it, and that is why you've got to those figures. And I always detail and elaborate how much work has gone into getting to that figure, rather than it just feeling like you're chipping the price for the sake of it. So that's your unconditional bid. Now, sometimes it's difficult to put an unconditional bid forward as a developer if it is a lot lower than what they're expecting. And what we then typically do is something called a soft offer. So we don't actually put a line in the sand and put it in wet ink. And let's say someone wants £500,000 for a house, and you're going to go in at 400. I would typically put in a soft offer just to sort of test the water, and that would be something along the lines of, we've worked and pulled it apart, and our technical team have done so much work on this, and we really can't get near the guide price. We're quite a far way off it, so it'd be really good to understand from you how much flexibility there is. If they say we're not going to go lower than 475, you know that you are going to upset them if you put 400 forward, in which case they're money motivated, so I'd push a lot harder on the conditional part of the offer. Now, moving towards the conditional part, as I mentioned, it can be conditional to anything. What I would highly recommend is the time frames and the difference between what the conditional offer and unconditional offer is directly driven by their requirements. You may say to them, okay, I think I can pay you more. I think I can pay you guide price, but I do need some time to de-risk the planning or to do this. What sort of timeframes are you looking for? Rather than just in your own internal or in your business coming up with a potential time frame, communicate that with them and say what's important for you. Obviously, you want as long as possible, and I would highly recommend that it's sometimes easier to agree a shorter period with an extension than go in for 24 months or 36 months, whatever it may be. So to put that in a sort of a script for you, Ed, don't put the unconditional offer forward until you sort of kind of floated the idea as a soft offer with the vendor. Once you've done that and you feel like it would be semi-welcome and it's an offer and they may consider it, we would typically try and put as much context behind it. So looking at the site and its constraints and its risks, this is where we're at unconditionally. We understand that might be a little bit less than your expectations, but we can get in. We're not part of a chain. There's no particular conditions attached to the offer other than potentially searches and surveys, or maybe There may be a small condition, but equally, if you're willing to wait, we can put in a conditional offer where we can actually pay you more. So it's kind of up to you which way we go. And just try and like speak their language. Depending on who you're dealing with, your seller, it's kind of like read the room and try and like communicate with them on a level where they can understand. We've had vendors that are we bought off developers, right? So they get it. You know, the way that you communicate with a developer is very different to, you know, a grandma that's selling her orchard and she doesn't really understand all the property jargon. You've kind of got to go to the level where they can consume information and agree a deal with you. And that's probably the biggest takeaway, Ed, from this. But I don't think anything that you said is necessarily wrong or what we wouldn't do. So I think you're on the same sort of wavelength, really. But for me, it's all about matching, fact finding, finding out as much information as possible, then speaking their language, which is sort of tip 2, and then 3, make sure the offer, it doesn't overcomplicate something that could be a bit more straightforward. Sometimes less words is more. Sometimes you don't have to declare every fine detail in an offer. For an example, I see a lot of people say, I would like to buy your, you know, garden for 1 million quid, subject to planning for 6 houses. And then if we get 5, we'll do X. If we get 4, we'll do Y. And that might be too complicated for a Joe Blogs or a Jane Doe. And you may be better off just to say, we'd love to buy your property for X, for £1 million, subject to planning. And that's it for residential planning. Try not to overcomplicate things. That will come further down the line. And then what we would recommend you do is go into heads of terms so that both you and the seller are on the same page with what's going on. Hopefully that's answered your question. If anyone actually wants to see our offer template, we can share that. Just comment offer letter, and we can of course send that out to you guys. But hopefully that's helpful, Ed, and I hope you're well, mate. Cool. So moving on to the next question. As I said, reading these as I go. More curiosity than anything, but might generate some useful content. Do you trade in property? If you don't, why don't you as part of your business strategy? So I'm guessing in trade in might be not like a car dealership. I'm guessing this is selling sites on that benefit with value, whether that's planning consent or we've got into a position that's lower and we're trading it out higher. And essentially we do trade properties. We have quite frequently done things called a subsale, or commonly known as a back-to-back, where we've exchanged on the site. We've pulled some CGIs together, potentially got planning, put it in a better marketplace, got a lease in place or whatever, and then actually sold it on to someone else. So we actually end up not being the owners. So that's called a subsale. We've done that quite a few times. We've done it with a few houses where we think it's undervalued or cheaper than it potentially should be. And in that particular instance, we've exchanged on the deal, agreed at least a 2 or 3 months exchange delay completion, again, a conditional purchase. And then we have then sold it in an auction between the exchange and completion deadline. So you then subsell it onto someone else. And that is also another potential option. So I would have said back in the sort of earlier years, we used to do it quite a bit more because our deals were a lot smaller. But actually now I would probably say it's less common. But ideally, I want to get to a place where our business is trading sites back into the market as much as we're delivering. So trying to sort of split our pipeline, if that makes sense. Just want to double check I'm actually live because it's telling me that I'm having some issues. I'm just going to quickly message the technical team. So hopefully that has answered your question. I think I know that's probably from Catherine, who's been trading quite a lot recently. Now, this is quite a long question from Hitesh. Thank you very much for the question. So the last 12 months, I've focused my energy on a build-to-suit model. This is a go-to model in large-scale commercial and industrial warehouse space, which is where I was between 2011 and 2019. Not much in resi. I'm drowned neck deep in asset class that we built to sell and then had to rent them out. I mean, that is kind of like the I suppose, the curse of the development. You've got to exit them to sell them on right, and we're not in really the best market to renting stuff out because of the mortgage costs. Making a penny on the pound spent, selling the BTS idea with social housing provider, councils, vendor, housing for veterans, TA, etc. Why this? You are live, Another. Thank you very much, Another. Really appreciate you confirming we're live. Selling the BTS idea, social housing providers, councils, housing for veterans, TA, which is temporary accommodation. Why this shouldn't be a model for SME developers with reduced but certain profit model is beyond me. So I believe that a lot of this, a lot of the things that you mentioned, so social housing providers, councils, housing for veterans and temporary accommodation, the reason why I don't believe it's a great model for SME developers is because you typically benefit in this market space with scale. When we were building our social housing portfolio, pretty much every bank that would give us a revolving credit facility or a facility on the whole stock, they just laughed us out the door and said, come back to us when you've got a minimum of 50 million quid's worth of assets under management. So that delta for an SME to get funding, to get critical mass is really difficult. But if you're already at 100 million portfolio, it's very easy to what they call aggregate and bring those portfolios in. So the real question is, above is the context of the question, really. Why a build-to-suit model is not acceptable, acted on upon as much as SME developers as against developing for a private / rented sales model. So, yeah, I mean, to touch on my other point, I think the main reason us SME property developers will struggle to get into those types of strategies is because the private smaller market, so what SME developers typically build, 1 to 50 houses, you can kind of pick up those plots anywhere. You can get funding quite easily from a debt provider anywhere. It's a very well suited model for the SME developer. When you go to bigger stuff, it's really difficult to get to the size, and it's that growth gap that's really, really difficult. So the SME development market are currently developing about 20% of the national delivery. It used to be about 40%. It's come down because there's been bigger players getting bigger, essentially, and there's not really, you will recognize there's the large developers that scale and then do really well and buy other businesses and whatever they may do, and they might be turning over a few hundred million a year. And then there's us, who sort of between 1 and 50 million turnover, but there's no one really in between for a very long period of time, and that is because these strategies are for the bigger players and not for the smaller players. So it's in my opinion, it's two things: funding, which is kind of like your cash flow, getting the cash flow in there. And then that has a knock-on effect for the growth between SME and big, because it benefits the bigger players. So when I look at our competitive advantage as a business, we're not going to be the business that goes and buys a Sainsbury's on a 25-year lease because our debt costs are too high. If you're a massive developer or a big home builder, or even a pension fund, or even a big commercial asset owner, whether that's in commercial space or industrial warehousing, you might have a facility at 4.5% that you can borrow debt at. Ours is way too expensive, therefore we're out of the market to buy that yield, and that is because it warrants the bigger players. Hopefully that answers your question, Hitesh. Quick plug for Zero. We've actually had a few listeners sign up for this, so if you're not on Zero already, we actually have a referral link which is on the screen there, which is bit.ly /3CRPI in capitals, lowercase h, and then a uppercase 0, or it might be an O. But yeah, we'd love to see you guys. We use Zero and everything, so it's a really, really useful tool. Cool. Bartoni79, next question. Hi guys, great vid as always. I came across a term the other day where a piece of land had a 10-year clawback of 20% for change of use from July 2024. How does this work? Let's say it's marketed at 100K, and do you avoid these types of property land purchase deals? Cheers. So this commonly sounds like a overage condition, which would then be either a covenant on the land or a covenant in the contract, and it's essentially the clawback is, I think, an overage. Sometimes they are called anti-embarrassment clauses. And it's essentially if someone is trading something into the open market and they don't want to be seen to either be losing value. It's really common that you will see this in government-owned buildings, because if, let's say, for example, the NHS or like, any governing body really sell a plot of land for 100 grand, and then a developer gets planning consent on it and sells that land for 3 million quid, it looks really bad on the body that have sold the site. So they typically put clauses in it. I've actually never seen it where it's subject to a lease or a change of use. That's really unique. And I guess there's probably some sort of value in there. Maybe they're worried about direct competition. Maybe they've relocated to a new area locally and they don't want competition of the same use class going in. So it's potentially in there for that reason. I would actually say there's no reason that you should avoid anything with a covenant on it. Just make sure you understand all of the repercussions. Is there any way that you could remove the covenant, or is there any other way that you can do a strategy that can get around it? So I would actually say if they're very forward, if the selling agent or the seller is very forward about this issue, that might benefit you because it might put a lot of people off. So I would actually recommend you to spend more time on this one than maybe one that doesn't have on it, because everyone wants a simple deal. And it's when we get paid for fixing problems, right? So if there's a problem with something, the better you fix it, the better you'll be remunerated. So I wouldn't say avoid it. I'd say that you just really understand the repercussions and the nuances with it, and your purchasing lawyer should be able to help you there. Yeah, pretty unique. Haven't heard of it in that sense. I've heard of it all the time where, for an example, when we did buy an NHS building, they tried to put a covenant on the building that if we exited the sale of the property within 10 years, they wanted 50% of the uplift in value. So we bought the site for 370, I think. So if we then sold it for, let's say 470 the following year, they would want 50K out of us. We pushed back and actually said that we're not going to buy the building if there's that clause in, because it kind of prevents you from, really making any decisions. And they did eventually forego on that. But only I would say that if there's a problem with a deal like this, don't necessarily walk away from it. See if you can fix that problem and deal with it. And hopefully that was helpful. Cool. Tony Brennan, obviously a ground up listener because we talk about Bitcoin. And the question is, Jack Jiggens, the answer we all want to know, have you bought Bitcoin yet? So comically, I actually sent a screenshot to the ground up boys a few months back because I bought Bitcoin, I think in 2016. I pulled all my money out actually to put it in real estate, because in our personal portfolio, we actually get a really strong IRR on cash. So technically I've still got a foot in the door from a Bitcoin perspective, but obviously not as excited about it as Stuart, but big shout out to Stuart for always waving the Bitcoin flag. So technically, Tony, yes, I do. And Ben does as well. He's got a little crypto pot as well, but obviously not as heavily invested as Stu. But yeah, I kind of like leaning into the fact that I'm against it, just to play devil's advocate for it with him and piss him off, really. So that's answered that question. Cool. Question in from my good friend Johnny Buybox, who runs a Amazon FBA business and who also features on Ground Up. The question is, what benefits has this government delivered or could deliver for your business? Really, really good question. And quite frankly, nothing, I don't believe. Costs have gone up in every business. They are more focused on supporting social housing rather than supporting SME developers, so much so. There's been talks of change of planning. So I would say that is probably the most obvious answer, but we're yet to see many of those changes come into play. So not a lot, really. Not a lot that we're seeing. Obviously, tax is a change, which doesn't really benefit us personally or our business. So we are seeing very little benefit at this stage. I think there could be some benefit for our social housing portfolio, but it all depends on what changes they make and what they do. I think that it's still really early days for the property market. And unfortunately, a lot of the changes that they have made have produced uncertainty in the market. And when people are selling, when people are moving house, it's a very big decision to make. So they need the confidence, which we don't have in the market. So Johnny, nothing, fortunately. And like you, our costs are going up to run our businesses. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's actually any worse than the Conservative government leadership. You know, whether it's between them, Labour and the Conservative government, I wouldn't have said there's much in it. I think the Conservative actually messed things up quite a bit. But I do think we need some sort of reform in place, whatever the party looks like that will do that. Hope that's answered that question. From SVN Developments Holding, the question is how to be tax efficient when starting best company structures. So this is actually a really, really common topic with mentees that we operate, that we help operate their businesses. And I will caveat this with, I'm not a tax advisor. Seek your own tax advice. Everyone's situation is different. But we've found that what works for us is we essentially you kind of start off small and then you want to grow. And the way that we quantify starting off small is you don't really want all these tax bills, accountancy bills to set up all of these businesses. We've got quite a lot of businesses in our group now, but it didn't start that way. We set up one trading company that was owned in our personal names, and it's grown from there as our business got bigger and bigger and bigger. Typically, if a project is over £1 million, we'll set that up in an SPV, so special purchase vehicle, which is an independent company for that deal to keep it segregated from other deals that we're doing. Often, if we have an investor coming in, it obviously segregates it for them as well. And that will be set up with its own bank account and be independent from other deals. But the structure is typically directors are personally at the top. We would recommend that if you do get to a certain size, you know, maybe, you know, when you are turning over enough to pay those accountancy bills in companies and warrant that, we would recommend each director has their own limited company that they own 100% of, and that layer sits above any shared entities. The reason you do that is because if you want to draw a dividend, you partner as your partners, you have to draw the same amount, and you might not want to actually draw that into your personal name. So, for example, if Ben wanted to take a dividend to go on holiday, but I didn't necessarily want to pull it out and pay tax on that amount, it would sit in my top holding company that I own, and I could do what I want with it. Below that is the shared top co. So our limited companies own the shares in that top co, and then below that we have kind of like top co's again, but in two separate groups. We have one which is a holding entity, so holds assets, and then another which is a trading entity, so assets that we buy, build, and sell sit in the trading entity, and then assets we buy, build, and hold sit in the holding company. In the trading company, we also have, it's VAT registered, so we also have all of our costs that go through the business, so office staff, bills, whatever it may be, salaries within that trading company. The trading company charges fees across all the SPVs for acquisitions, project management, and estate management. So that's how we keep the revenue up into that business. And that's pretty much the structure. We do have underneath the, to make things, if you're still with me, underneath our holding company, which is obviously below our top co, we also have split that into holding residential and holding commercial, because typically holding commercial, you want to be VAT registered, and typically holding resi, you don't want to be VAT registered because your income is not a VATable expenditure. But again, not tax advice, but that's how we structure up, and it works really well. And we also can move assets and funds between the group, and we can also do our tax return at a group level. So we get group accounts and group tax. So you can offset tax into various different areas of the business. So if you've got one business that's got a tax bill and one business that hasn't, you can kind of offset that, so you're not paying tax and then making a loss somewhere else. Hopefully that's helpful, but yeah, quite a technical question, and hopefully that made sense. It might have actually been worth to share a group structure. One thing that I would also add, because actually Johnny might be listening, and we were talking about this the other day, if you have a business, you typically have a slightly different structure. If you have a service-based business, you typically have a slightly different structure if you're buying assets in the service-based business, because you might want to split that out and what we call have a trade co, which is the trading entity, and then a prop co. So this, and picture below your limited company that you own, you've got all of the businesses that you operate. So it's quite, for example, Johnny in his Amazon business, he might have his Amazon trading company as Amazon Trading Limited, and then he might have a propco which holds the asset that the Amazon business rents. So he technically rents from himself, but that is how you generate a propco structure, and that is called propco opco structure, which is slightly different, but I thought that would be relevant to mention for any service-based businesses. But good question, SVN Developments Holdings. I'm actually going to probably leave this question majoritively for Ben next week, because he will answer this a lot better than I will. But the question is, must-haves in a JCT contract, should I supply materials to make it cheaper? Short answer is, I believe there's a standard JCT structure template, which is, I believe, in place to protect the contractor and the person that's paying for the project, so the developer or the client, I suppose. The obvious things that are really important into there is just have a really clear defined roles. Personally, I would say that you from a contractor's perspective, obviously they might want clauses in for payment terms, and then from a owner's perspective, you might want clauses in for time delays and variations. JCTs are obviously quite complicated because you don't really want to get into a place where you have several variations and the contractor can lean on those variations to delay things or sort of move the JCT to a side and sort of call it as an unknown from the outset. But I would highly recommend that if you haven't formed a JCT contract before, potentially get like a building consultancy in place to help you negotiate that. So once you've done your first one, you lean on their experience to get that all in place. I believe we all get our JCTs and contract internally now, and we do use the standard template, which you can just buy online. But I would say that if you're doing quite a large project, I would recommend getting a consultant in place to push that into a good place for you. But again, I think Ben will be able to answer that one. That's not really my bag or my area of expertise. In Central Suites, we actually don't typically have JCTs for contracts sort of below 150 grand. We just sort of have more of a gentleman's agreement. Cool. Hopefully that semi-answered that one. Best structures for loan agreements. So whether we do an equity deal or a loan deal with an investor, we always have a loan agreement in place, and we will always try and get them as much security as we can. So if we have a debt lender in place and it's only second charge that's available, we will try and get that in place for the investor. If that's not available, obviously some further security might be an option. But there isn't really, your lawyer should be able to pull together a pretty straightforward loan agreement. Obviously, it's really good to document, even if it's an equity position, because it is a loan into the company still. There's no real complex structure other than the fact that we do get them in place. We make sure they replicate the heads of terms that we agree with the investor, and we'll always try and get them as much security as we can. Currently doing my first flip, completing in mid-July to market. When should I look for the next? My rule is you depending on your size, but we always look for deals, and I think that enables us to always be securing good deals. So SVN, I don't really know what sort of stage you're at or how much spare time you have, but we're kind of always looking for deals, always raising capital, and I would highly recommend to try and get into a place, if it fits with your goals, to constantly be looking. Cool. Here he is. Good question coming in. So what must an acquisitions business partner bring to the table to truly add value? Acquisitions is the short answer. So acquisitions is one of those roles that, it's difficult because deals often come like buses. For us anyway, and it's really difficult. I think one of the hardest things to do in development is actually find profitable deals as well as raise capital. So it's not an easy job. I kind of feel that person's got to be pretty skilled in processes, pretty skilled in obviously the analysis and managing risk, obviously quite skilled in sales, be creative, be a little bit of a warrior and batter down those doors and don't take no for an answer and pester people sometimes when you have to. But fundamentally, if the activity is not going in, the success won't drop either way. So I think a good business partner that's doing acquisitions, the obviously the fruit is, the fruit that you're trying to get to is deals, right? So the sort of proof in the pudding is getting deals over the line. The KPIs to get there is activity. You've got to view sites, you've got to get offers out, you've got to be analyzing deals, you've got to be trying every single thing to get a deal over the line. You've got to try and think, when you bid on a site and miss out, you've got to think, I'm going to follow up on that. Make sure that deal is mine if it does fall through. But what can I learn going forward? So I think hitting KPIs, getting deals over the line, it's a super difficult space to be in, because as I mentioned, you might have a bit of a dry spell and then some deals sort of come in. So that is back to SVN's question. That is why I think you always need to be looking, because then you can build into your pipeline and build that bank of projects to move on to. So hopefully that answers your question. On to the next one. So we actually had some joke questions. So thanks, Meg Waller, for the question. The question was hot dogs or burgers? Question mark, then the American flags. This is one of my wife's friends wondering whether I'm a hot dog person or a burger person. And I can tell you I am a burger person. George Wilson, how you doing, mate? I saw you 2 days ago down at Regatta. Hope you had a good time. How does one wear a blue shirt in this heat? I went to a family office event in the city, so I had to go in a suit because I didn't really know what the dress sense was. And the trick was keep the suit on, don't take it off. Just absorb the position you're in. As soon as that jacket comes off, sweat patches might appear, and just roll with it. So that's how I wore a blue shirt. Biffin's Kitchens. What hair product do I use? I use VO5 matte. Matte Clay. Tyler, where are the glasses from? They're actually quite reasonable glasses. So this was in my Instagram story. They are from Meller, MELLER. And then Finn, who's our intern at the moment, said, who's your favorite Fintern? And it is yourself, Finn. Cool. That is the back of all of the pre-loaded questions. I have one question in while we've been talking. Anyone listening at the moment, I know we've got a few people live. Please get your questions in if you do have any, because I can answer. We have time to answer some questions, but I will start off with Tatiana's question. Bear with, let me just change the screen around. So the question is, hi, Jack and Ben, can you explain how the SAP calculations works at the current building regulations, and at what stage of commercial to resi conversions is best to get SAP engineers on board? Now, that really is a really technical question. I think Ben will be the best person to answer that. But a couple of things I can say about it. So obviously a SAP calculation is typically actually now part of some planning regulations to get building control sign off. Building regulations to get building control sign off. We are actually having to do a SAP calculation on one of our HMOs as we speak. And actually, I would highly recommend Ryan, who runs Sustainabuild, who can get these done for you. I'll let Ben go into the detail of how the SAP calculation is carried out. But Ben would probably say get some form of engineer on board when you're designing the scheme. So really early on. I would probably say when you're going into detailed design, that is a really good stage to be in. I believe Aura have the capabilities to sort of do SAP calculations from their design themselves. So just make sure that whatever architect you're taking forward, they can understand the fabric of what is changing and improve that fabric to where you would like it as a paying customer. So I can answer that as soon as you're going to design, or if you feel like your architect hasn't got the capabilities at that point, would probably be good. But again, I will let Ben answer that one. All these technical questions that are rolling in, and the acquisition stuff's my bag. But good question, Tatiana. You'll have to tune in next week, and we will get Ben to answer that one too. Cool. Any last questions? I don't know if there will be. I will actually say I did have a question that was asked, and I will answer it live. It was actually asked by Richard Woodstock. If you just bear with, I'll pull it up. It was a really good question. So Richard asked, essentially, he's in the process of negotiating a commercial lease, and he wanted to know basically how you do it, what you need to negotiate, and because you may or may not have a lawyer involved, and also a lawyer might not be the best person to negotiate a lease for you. So in that particular instance, you may have to, we do this ourselves. We actually negotiate our leases ourselves, but you might actually bring someone in to help you negotiate that. Typically, a commercial agent is a good person to go to. I actually don't know what they would charge to negotiate a lease. I think if they've done the letting, it might fall as part of the fee, which is typically 10% of the first year's rent or 1 month's rent. But if you haven't got a commercial agent on it, you typically do it yourself. So to answer the question that I'm coming on to, his question is, how do you negotiate a commercial lease with a potential commercial tenant? And if you just bear with me 1 second, I'm just going to be getting up our standard template, which I can send out to anyone if they would like to see it. Head of terms, here we go. So there's quite a lot that goes into negotiating a commercial lease, and that is why I think Rich has asked the question, because he's not really sure how much detail to go into and what to prioritize. But essentially, we cover off multiple things, and what we do in the negotiation is it's really difficult negotiating, because the prospective tenant may say, I'll pay you £1,000 a month for your building, and negotiate on that value. But there's so many other things that are really important to negotiate in a commercial lease. So even though I might accept £1,000 in rent, there's other factors that play a bigger part. It's not as simple as renting a residential place where you just put 1 month deposit down. You've obviously normally got to pass referencing, and then you're off. There's lots of nuances, and I'll run through them. So we build a heads of terms document, which we're happy to share. And we, at the top of that, we have the lease, or the example of the demise that they'll be taking, the date, and it's called a lease proposal. We then go through various sections. So we detail the property, so where it is, what part they're taking, if there's any parking that goes with that building, and the square footage. We then request their information, so tenant information, so their name, their company number, and their solicitor information. We then look at the term of the lease, so how long it is, including any details about breaks. We then go into detail about talking about the break. So if it's both ways, every 6 months, every 24 months, whatever it may be. I would highly recommend, if you've got a tenant looking for a 10-year lease, try and maybe negotiate a longer lease with a break at 10 years, because then you avoid going back into legals to agree a new lease. We then talk about charges. That might be service charge, that might be estate fees, that might be various other things. We then actually go into detail about the rent, the cost of rent, whether it's including VAT. We talk about what it is across the duration, whether it's inflationary linked, CPI linked, or linked to something, whether there's rent reviews, etc. We then also break down the costs in the service costs. So we typically do open book with our service costs. So we actually work out what the costs are, share the statement, and take in a monthly charge. We then share details about the utilities and the energy, who pays for what, where, and how. We then talk about the deposit. So typically we would take 3 months rent deposit. We then talk about rent reviews. We then talk about the statute, which is the Landlord and Tenancy Act. So it's a 1954 Act. If you are a landlord, you probably want them outside the Act. So basically you can take possession of the building again at the end of the lease or during a break. If they are inside the Act, they have the right to renew the lease at market rent. The fit out, what details of how you're handing it over and what the tenant would like to do. The use class of the premises and what the expected use class is. The repair obligations. So typically leases are fully internal repairing or fully externally repairing and insuring, and it's basically identifying details of whose responsibility is what. If you're a landlord and you've got multiple tenants in one building, it'll probably be internally repairing. If it's just one tenant in the whole building, you'll typically do fully repairing and externally. We'll then talk about the handover condition and maybe schedule that with the scheduler conditions. We will then talk about timeframes for target completion date and move-in date. And then we would typically have a box for any other conditions outside of that. So hopefully that's all the areas that are useful. Richard, I'll send you this video link so you can watch it. But yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. So when someone says, I'll rent it off you for this, as I mentioned, it's not really how you go about negotiating, because there's so many other details. If, for an example, a tenant is happy to pay, put down a 6-month rent deposit, I might take a view on charging them less rent, or if they sign a longer lease, the rent might come down. So that's a good example of how it should move. But that is it. that's all of my questions today. I hope that's been useful for listeners, and I really enjoy the Q&As. It's nice and easy. Did it off the cuff, and a massive apologies again for being slightly late. If we could just ask for one thing, if you could please share this podcast with a friend or someone that you think it would benefit, that would be massively appreciated. We're obviously trying to boost our following, and that enables us to do more. We're actually now monetized on YouTube, so hopefully these episodes get better and better. But if we don't speak before, have a good weekend and see you next week.